Good evening, everybody. Looking forward to a quick audio test. We'll get rolling in just a moment. It's a beautiful day. Perfect. Let me know if you can see my screen, and in the chat, feel free to let me know what part of the continent you're dialing in for this evening. And let's have some fun. Also, the Q&A is open. Happy to run through keeping things interactive. We are live 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and certainly happy to share some best practices. Just finished off with a great group of Doc 2, my personal orthodontist in Ottawa. Helped them for the third time now in preparation for sale. And yeah, it's a wild time for dental office leases. All right, so maybe just to kick things off, to help customize tonight, I'll pull up a quick poll. So to help give a little bit of a perspective of um, and customize the content for this evening, let me know. Do you own or do you lease your space? Are you thinking of owning, acquiring, expanding, renovating, relocating? Are you thinking of selling within the next 5 years or stay put? Also, in terms of leverage, we'll touch on different perspectives, right? If you're month to month, if it's coming up in the next 2 years, 2 to 5, doing over 5 for those of you that own. And certainly from that perspective, if you've got curiosities in rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, and other objectives for this evening. Perfect. So we'll let those come in. That's great. Looks like about 67% lease, about 25% own, 63, now 38, etc., which is fantastic. Well, I truly appreciate it. And we've got a very special guest on with us this evening to help share. So, for those of you that haven't joined one of our continuing education courses in the past, welcome. We do, and we know how difficult firsthand it is to be an entrepreneur, let alone to be a practicing dentist through the trials and tribulations of the past 5 years. So certainly, if you haven't given yourself a pat on the back, please do so because it has been brutal. COVID, right? Inflation, staff changes, staff turnover, the difficulty in selling clinics, the impacts of the lease with the banks and with insufficient term or demolition clauses or relocation clauses, the inability to sell. Cirrus at a high level continues to be really the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our size and scope in North America. This is it. This is all we do. So, welcome. We will be processing our CE credits within the next 10 business days. And yeah, appreciate Sinclair for sponsoring tonight's event and looking forward to sharing some key best practices. So, really, the high level tonight is we've got Taliban, and I'll do some great introductions. But ultimately, we want to help share some of the best practices to help keep more money into your pocket. How to structure the upcoming lease renewal or lease negotiation. How to be strategic about the investments into equipment and into your space to maximize some of that return in preparation for eventual sale for those of you that are there, as well as how to avoid the landlord winning in the next renewal negotiations. I just spoke to a doctor today in Ontario that had purchased a clinic and the seller was required to pay the landlord $50,000 just for the simple assignment of the lease to the buyer. If not, the buyer couldn't get the lending, etc. And, at the end, the seller paid it $50,000 just for one single signature approving the assignment of the lease from the seller to the buyer, which was one of the conditions of sale. So as I pass it over to Talib, And again, from that perspective, this is a really a fantastic opportunity to have some great Q&A as we go. So we want to get a good understanding for questions, concerns, thoughts, comments. We'll keep things interactive, keep things fun. We will be issuing CE credits again by 10 business days. Talib's the employee of Sears Consulting Group. I'm the CEO and owner. And it's a privilege to have Talib on this evening. Talib is a perfect example of what we do at Cirrus. Talib's former role was working for one of the big national coffee chains, and one of the first things that franchisees would be advised to do is to not engage directly with a landlord, help leverage the expertise of the in-house expert. So in that similar franchise model, Talib worked on the lease negotiation side for us for years, and then also now works with us as the director of accounts, specifically working with clients and multi-site clients prior to being retained and helping to coming up with good negotiation treatment plans. So there's really no one else I could suggest that would be great to give a perfect example of challenges that we're seeing amongst landlords today, best practices that are working well for dentists in the negotiation or renegotiation of the office lease, as well as helping to really create a huge return to keep as much earnings or EBITDA or profit into your practice. So, Talib, thank you so much for joining us, and again, welcome to the webinar.
Not a problem. My pleasure. And good evening, everybody. And glad you could make it and join us and get some insights on this important part of everybody's practice, right? And so, yes, you're there to carry out the function of dentistry, but behind that, there's a lot of things that's driving your business, right? And you want to make sure that that business is as tight as possible, so you are getting the best return for that investment that you made way back when you started your undergraduate degree. Just a little bit of background about myself: undergraduate in biology at U of T, and then the master's of business also at Rotman at the University of Toronto. And yes, been with Cirrus for the last 4 years now. I was on the lease negotiation side and recently promoted to director here with an increase of our business, and just to give our clients and potential clients understanding of what we do and how we can improve.
Yeah, and a high level, for those of you that may not know who we are, what we do is we're unique. We're really the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our kind in the country that does what we do. We're not brokers, so there's never that inherent conflict of interest that the more you pay, the higher amount of commissions that's baked into your rent. So, fundamentally, we're only remunerated directly by the doctor. That means we work with you for as long as it takes, as many different lease negotiations as it takes, and we work with anyone else on your professional team, let it be lawyers, accountants, etc. We want to help to make sure that from start to finish, right, we're there to keep as much money into your pocket as possible. And most leases now for dentists across the country are over $1 million for 10 years. So ultimately, if you're about to sign a check for $1 million, right, you want to help squeeze as much as possible. So, Talib, you should have control if you want to kick us off. The
Yeah.
lease, Talib, why? Why is the lease so important? Why do we even need a lease?
Well, yeah, I mean, the lease is the only document that's going to control your relationship with your landlord. And I guess the areas of concern essentially are that this document, once you sign it, is binding for the term of the lease. And usually these leases are either 5-year increments or 10-year increments. So making a mistake at the front end of this relationship with your landlord costs you throughout, right? So you want to make sure that you do it right. As Eric said, you might think of a lease as just a rental payment, but that rental payment is a monthly payment. And then you're making that every month, and then you're making it for 10 years. So altogether, it works out to, millions of dollars worth of funds that are going to the landlord. You want to control that as much as possible because it's a controllable cost. This is the largest controllable cost for your practice, but you can only control it before you sign. You negotiate a deal, then you sign it, and then it's firm. So there's 2 times that you can do that. That's either when you're starting your practice, and you might think, oh, I already signed the lease. I have a lease now. There's nothing I can do. There's a renewal, right? So your lease is going to expire, and you have to make sure that you engage the landlord early enough that you have the leverage to negotiate these terms. Because the closer you get to expiry, essentially the landlord understands that it's kind of too late for you to move, right? So they know you have no leverage. And then they just say, well, the rent's going to be this for the renewal, and I'm not making any changes to the lease document.
Yeah, it's interesting. The latest stats we see is well over 54% of doctors across the country are overpaying in rent, which is so counterintuitive because, in our opinion, you are the best tenants of on the planet. The highest build out cost. Easily across the country, it's $350 per square foot. Some markets $250 per square foot, but many are being built at $350 per square foot, just for construction, not equipment. You're in the same location for 26 and a half years on average. You're COVID proof. You can't work from home regardless of what your staff says. And you're always bringing in high quality foot traffic. So why, right? Why historically do doctors overpay in rent? Well, part of it is what Talib just mentioned is the data, right? And we've now have over 32 years worth of data and dental office leases on file. So we've probably dealt with your landlord before or something similar, or very similar in the area. In addition, as Talib mentioned, the best time to start the renewal negotiations is typically 2 years prior to the lease expiry. Unfortunately, the average doctor starts the renewal 2 months prior to expiry or pretty close to it. And of course, there are critical dates within the lease, of which some state that you must give written notice or registered letter to the landlord 6 to 12 months in advance prior to the lease expiry, or the options to renew become null and void, and you have no right to stay in the space after the lease expires, which of course can be devastating. And then what we're seeing is landlords putting in new standard form leases. They're also adding in demolition clauses, relocation clauses, which now many of the brokerages across the country are actually assessing a reduction of $350 per square foot in the valuation of the clinic. One we were recently involved with, the brokerage reduced the price of the clinic, $1 million producing clinic, $300,000 worth of profit, right? Reduced the price of the clinic by over $350 per square foot. Um, so a couple of things we wanted to share here, and just tell for a little bit of background. Roughly, we have 29% are thinking of opening or relocating the practice. Another 24% are thinking of transitioning or selling within the next 5 years. 14 planning to stay put, right? And roughly 64% lease, about 36% own their building. So for those of you that own, you're not out of the woodwork because you're still going to need a lease that separates the real estate corporation from the practice corporation. So we would work hand in glove with your accountant and anyone else on the professional team to advise on what fair market rents are. But obviously, the lease is very important if you plan to sell and keep your real estate as a passive form of income. So we'll touch on that as well. A couple of the key pieces Talib was showing here is don't underestimate the value. It's remarkable when you look at a ground floor retail space paying $5,000 a month with a 3% annual increase. Looking at that over the next 30 years that you or your buyer will be in the same location, it's a check for $2.9 million exiting the practice and going to the landlord. So therefore, understanding, right, or asking yourself, when was the last time you compared your rent to market price? I won't ask that in the poll question, but basically, if you have not compared your rent to market price and you have a lease coming up for renewal in the next 5 years, or you're planning to sell in the foreseeable future, it is a key number to have to make sure that you're not overpaying in rent. Some case studies, some of which Talib was the lease negotiator on. Here's one from Etobicoke. This was a situation with really a pretty brutal lease. And a brutal lease, in our definition, is anything that is so landlord friendly that it seems like a teeter-totter and is just so every little twist and turn and clause is in the landlord's favor. So things like personal guarantees, continuing liability post-sale, demolition, relocation, returning to pre-dental condition are just some of the dozens of clauses in there. But this was a mid-year career doctor that was very concerned about potentially relocating, etc. There were so many things in here that was a challenge. The landlord had a almost 100,000 worth of construction supervision fee within the lease. The doctor was also shocked to realize that they were personally and corporately liable indefinitely after the clinic was sold. And the landlord, prior to us helping the doctor, the landlord actually had a clause in there that stated that the landlord was entitled to a percentage of the practice sale proceeds. In
Yeah,
other
just to
words,
sorry, just to add to that.
please.
So most people when they think about the lease, they think about the rental rate, right? And we're talking about a per square foot. So say it's $25 a square foot. So most people focus on negotiating that $25 a square foot by a dollar or so. And on a 1,500 square foot space, you negotiate that a dollar, you're going to save $1,500 a year over a 10-year term. That's $15,000, which is great. But the more important things are in the actual document. This is a 70-page document, and these clauses contain these terms, which are essentially payouts for the landlord, right? No right to sale proceeds. That means you built up your practice over 30, 40 years, and now you want to transition out at retirement. And there's one line in the assignment clause that says, first of all, if you have to assign your lease, you have to get permission from the landlord. They have to approve your buyer, right? They have to approve that tenancy coming in, right? They might have the right to terminate the lease if they don't agree with it with the assignment. What's that going to do to your sale? And then you got to think about lines like the landlord has rights over the proceeds of the sale because they figure, well, it's my location. Yeah, you were here, but anybody could have been here, and I'm actually driving the value of your practice, not yourself, or I have a share in it, right? And this line in that assignment clause would give them the right to the profits off the sale when it happens. So I guarantee you, if you have a lease, just look at it, there's an assignment clause. And we're happy to do this analysis for you. And we do it all the time for anybody who joins us on the webinar. And yeah, just you have to pay attention to these lines and wording because it essentially guarantees the landlord rights over profits that should be going towards yourself.
Yeah, it's a key point. The For a little bit of the financial components, let's talk. So again, let alone if you are part of the 64% that lease versus the 36% that own, the the market data is key. So we have both our own licensed data as well as proprietary data that we utilize to help advise our clients in terms of what is fair and equitable market rent. But it's not just base rent. All too often, doctors just focus on the first half of the first page, the term, monthly payment, maybe the annual increase. But there's another 56 and a half other pages of other stuff in there that could have some significant issues. So, just some of the levers for those of you taking notes that can certainly keep more money into your pocket in your new build, expansion, second location, or simply renewal are things like base rent. Base rent obviously goes without saying. But what you don't want to fall into the trap is, hey, Mr. Landlord, what do you want to charge me? Oh, we want 38 per square foot. Well, I think 36 is better. And then all the back and forth, and you end up at 37. Not knowing full well that, the vacancy down the street or three other comparables that recently leased out were for 30 bucks per square foot, right? Rough numbers. So again, we can be born at night, just not last night. And having all the data before you pick up the phone is critical. So just looking at some recent rates, rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, but base rent is big. Annual increase. We've been very successful at locking in that annual increase to help keep as much money into the bank account, especially through these uncertain times. Common area maintenance. Common area maintenance is another big one where can be negotiated. So if you go through, so yeah, some of the big ones here is base rent, of course. Annual increase is another big one. So, we see some landlords ask 4, 5. We've seen some upwards of 6% for increases in rent. And then on the renewals, we saw one recently increase by 44%, meaning The doctor had a 5-year term with one 5-year option left. The landlord proposed a 44% increase in rent from what the doctor was paying today. So, for those of you that are in a month-to-month lease, or the many of you that have some upcoming leases for renewal, the more time and preparation, the better. Oops, sorry. So, base rent annual increase, common area maintenance is another big one. So, common area maintenance, what are you actually paying for? Right. So some of the strategies we've utilized over the past 32 years are things like a common area maintenance cap, for example. So it can't exceed a certain percentage per year. Or exclusions, right? Why are you paying for brokerage fees for a vacant space? Why are you paying for, certain things for the roof or different management fees, which could be exorbitant or upwards of 15%. So again, you don't want to, you want to be paying less than your neighbor because you are such a great tenant. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, I'm stuck and my landlord's just going to squeeze me. Trust me, the landlord needs you as much as you need them. In some cases, if not more, especially with all these landlords that are going through mortgage renewals, mom and pops, etc., significant increases in interest and mortgage expense, right? And if they don't have the corresponding rent, who do you think they're going to squeeze, right? Is it the nail salon that might be a month or two behind in rent, or is it the multi-million dollar dental clinic? So fixturing, free rent, tenant improvement allowance, right? Landlord work are just some of the different components. And again, landlords are. It's not a zero-sum game. We want the ability to help make sure that it's a win-win on both sides. Landlords love dental tenants. In some cases, there's a bit of education necessary as to the benefit of a dental tenant. But, with the over 13,000 of these deals we've done, part of it is really making sure that the doctor's aware of their leverage and realize that, again, going in with all the information can help maximize the return and really shape the lease to be an asset rather than, in many cases, the liability around the practice as it is today. So, Talib, you've been involved with a lot of these. For
Yeah.
doctors that own their
Yep.
building,
Yep.
and let's say they're to the mid or later stage of their career,
Hmm.
what sort of guidance and advice are you giving them, especially if they're not sure if the buyer can get financing to buy both the clinic and the real estate?
Yeah.
Especially if I'm selling my practice for $1 million and I'm going to sell my building for another $1 million,
Yep.
as well as all the other tax plannings or financial plannings in preparation for sale. Talib, what's some of the guidance you
Yeah.
give?
I mean, essentially, when you have a practice, you're going to either be leasing or you're going to own the building and own the practice. And if you're owning the building, you might be the only tenant or you might have other tenants, right? So at the end of the day, a lease is required in any scenario in terms of real estate. And you might think, oh, okay, well, I own the building and I own the practice, so I don't really need any documentation. Um, I'm paying myself rent, or maybe I'm not. But as Eric said, you're not going to stay in the practice forever. You might retain the property for a long time, but you might want to sell the practice. And how do you do that if there's no lease documentation? The buyer needs to know what they're getting into. The buyer needs to know what the rules of the building are, similar in a way when you're purchasing a practice or you're signing a lease. It's the same thing. So essentially, this documentation has to be sort of tailor made for your type of business, right? You want to make it marketable enough to attract buyers and still have the control, right, of a landlord, right? So essentially, again, over the last 32 years now, this is what we have been doing. We have been negotiating leases from a new start perspective, from a renewal, from creating leases for doctors who are landlords. Because also in terms of, in regards to being an owner, you might have tenants that aren't dental practices. And you don't want the same lease necessarily for a hair salon or a shoe store or whatever type of business that you have for your dental practice. And then you want to make sure you're charging the correct rents in the area, right? Making it marketable enough for a dental practice, making sure you're making enough profit So when a dental practice comes in and buys your practice, that you're going to make money off the space. Maybe you didn't pay yourself rent when you're a landlord. You need the separation in terms of legality as well, right? When if somebody slips and falls, they're going to sue you as a landlord. They're going to sue you individually. They're going to sue your practice. It's all exposed. If it's clearly defined in a lease, it's limited. You always want to limit your liability, whether you're an owner, whether you're leasing. There might be a guarantee in your lease if you're leasing space, a personal guarantee. After
Yeah.
10 years, the landlord should trust you. Like, why is your house and your cars and any other assets available for the landlord should you default? And then you got to be careful about the personal guarantees, because if you transfer out, if you assign your lease, landlords often do not release you.
So, yeah, as Talib's touching on, these are just some of the core pieces to be aware of within your lease agreement. This is a good one to screenshot, etc. So yeah, over 32 years, our core perspective and our mission is to help doctors be doctors. And one of the core components that we do all day, every day is to do a review of that lease and look through the local rental rates and vacancies and comp reports and demographics. But these are just some of the clauses to be aware of within your lease, as well as the impact that can have on the clinic, i.e., alterations, for example. So, do you have the ability to make changes in your space without the landlord's prior written consent? Most doctors, through COVID or otherwise, brought in contractors, made all sorts of changes, etc., and without knowing it, right, was in violation of the lease. So, right, we don't want to give the landlords other reasons to negate an option to renew or otherwise. Um, Other pieces that are top of mind are things like demolition and relocation. So I see a few questions that sort of came through on that side. So, well, demolition clause, in essence, is something that has become very common across the country. The demolition clause, in essence, is a right for the landlord, in many cases, just for thinking of redevelopment, has the right, regardless of being 1 year in or 2 years in or 5 or 10 or whatever, to your lease. They have the option to give you notice that you will be departing and they will be redeveloping and giving as little as 3 to 6 months worth of notice, and you are out. This has now become a big issue. We've worked with a lot of the big banks lately and did a big national call recently with RBC. Part of the conversation is the underwriters for the buyers, and to issue a loan, they want to make sure that there is the continuity and predictability of revenue. If there is a one-sided right that the landlord can bulldoze the building and kick you out in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, yes, landlords are now, or practice brokers are now decreasing the price of the clinic and factoring in the risk of relocation costs to the buyer. Typically, $350 per square foot is what certainly Tier 3 and others are assessing because of these demolition or relocation provisions. Relocation, arguably, a little bit worse. Relocation means that they can pick you up and move to any other corner of the mall with as little, in some cases, as 3 months worth of notice. And sometimes they'll cover the build out cost. Sometimes they'll cover the build out cost to a maximum of 2 or 3 months worth of rent, which is a significant issue considering could be 300,000 and they're going to pay you 10 or 15,000. So relocations are key because, right, if they do move you, is it the same size? Is it the same shape, right? How are we going to fit 5 operatories into a pie-shaped triangle type space? In addition to that, the other big challenge is there's no assurance that if they close you or they kick you out on a Friday at the end of the month, that you're up and running on the following Monday. So it could be 2 months, 6 months, 12 months as they're relocating you. And then it's not an issue even of lack of production, it's the patient attrition, right? Meanwhile, the whole time you're trying to find a friend's chair, you're trying to, see your patients, but the whole time is just, again, we're we've seen it far too often where these types of issues, if the landlord wants to appease a larger anchor tenant, right, can dramatically impact not only the saleability of the clinic, but certainly the ongoing production. Death and disability is another one. Devastating example of a doctor that had built it a beautiful six-operatory clinic. 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, he died of a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients, right? How much is that clinic worth? Unfortunately, in this case, the answer was zero, arguably less than zero, right? The bank got the pound of flesh from the life insurance policy, but the landlord went back to the spouse, unfortunately, and said, Mrs. Smith, unfortunately, you're now responsible for the roughly $9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. So some of the things that, again, why we're sort of screaming from the rooftops here tonight, and appreciate everyone's time, is to gain some awareness of dental specific language, components within the lease that can be fair and favorable to you. You are rare. You are the sole breadwinner in many cases for your clinic. If something were to happen to you or my godfather when he tore his rotator cuff, golfing and couldn't practice wet finger dentistry anymore, these are the types of clauses that can be a godsend. And in many cases, it's almost like a termination right that gives you, heaven forbid, or your estate the ability to terminate the lease and pick up and walk away, heaven forbid something were to occur. But these are the components, no different than the wills and estate planning. And we see a lot of our clients that might not have gotten to it yet. But don't forget, that's just as important for the it's just as important. A will, for example, to work with your attorney on is just as important for the assets as it is the liabilities. Talib mentioned before things like personal guarantees. I won't add that to the poll, but most doctors don't realize that is negotiable. And, are you incorporated today? Right? Does the landlord have you as a personal guarantor? Does that personal guarantee survive even after you've sold the clinic? Can become key. Another point we get a lot of questions on is overholding. So, talking to doctors an hour and a half ago that are facing a potential redevelopment for their clinic and didn't realize that if they go month to month, the landlord has the right to double the monthly rent. And that's called holding over or overholding, depending on part of the world you're in. So again, these are just some of the few components that we won't, overanalyze on tonight's event, but we certainly appreciate your time to take the first step. And if you're not sure, if you're following along in your lease, right, we'll give a section at the end, and happy to look through that for you to help at least understand where the red flags are, what the potential impact is, and how does that align to your eventual long-term transition.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like all important points, but you want to keep in mind the silence, right? Silence from the landlord. You're paying your rent. You don't hear from them. They're not doing anything. They don't contact you, maybe for maintenance issues, etc. But nothing really about the lease, right? And the silence is when they're doing their strategies, right? Like, well, if you're coming up for renewal, the more they don't hear from you or you don't hear from them, they're thinking maybe, well, if they don't exercise their option, they might we can redevelop the property at expiry, essentially, if you have options to renew, right? So it's important, as Eric said, to understand what you have in your hands, right? And then if you're early enough, you can negotiate things that are terrible for you and put in things that are better for you. Death and disability clauses, getting rid of personal guarantees. Yeah, so essentially it's all about being proactive in these situations because you're dealing with a physical asset that can't move.
Yeah, bang on. Perfect. So, you know, components here are, these types of things we see quite often. So this is one without getting too much into the nitty-gritty here on a beautiful Tuesday evening, but these are types of things you want to look at. You want to be looking for particular red flags. if this is sort of like the landlord, I call it the cake you eat it too. So the landlord in some cases have the option to, at the end of the term, either have you remove all the trade fixtures and in some cases leasehold improvements. So whatever it looked like when you moved in or potentially the seller, right, when they moved in, back in 1986, right, the landlord, and we have seen them charge up to $25 per square foot to the outgoing dentist to return it back to a pre-dental condition. That could be plumbing, that could be electrical, that could be walls, etc. Again, ask yourself, who would the landlord rather have pay? The doctor who's about to leave and move into their own building and move out, or the landlord coming out of their own pockets and proceeds? The other thing to be aware of is, what is the landlord entitled to? And depending on how trade fixtures are defined, in many cases, whatever is affixed to the property, landlords typically say is owned by the landlord, depending on what is defined as trade fixtures. So, of course, landlords are the world's oldest profession, right? The lord of the land. And they found lots of ways through, right, real estate and contract law to make these leases as landlord friendly as possible. And again, we're not talking about tearing them up, etc., but first of all, being aware of what's within there, as well as making things at least fair. To know if you are to leave, what can you take with you? What does the landlord feel is their property? Right. Also, if you plan to leave and another dentist or DSO comes in behind you, right? How do we help to make sure that we're going to minimize lack of production and or patient attrition afterwards? So in other words, this is just one of the many clauses we do look at to make sure that the landlord doesn't have all of these great options above you. Relocation clauses, again, same thing, as I mentioned before, are just some core concerns we want to be prepared with. This was a personal client of mine. We did a webinar recently, large Sinclair client, and this was one that Talib
Yeah,
had worked on and worked through. So I'll share this. I don't know how well the audio will work. Let me know, Talib, and then Talib, you can give a little background on the situation here.
sure. Yeah, the audio's not coming through. But there we go.
Yeah, please, Talib, give us a little background on the situation.
It actually just came through, so we're good. And then it cut out again. So I will give you some background here. So Dr. Alavian out on the West Coast in BC, found a great site, wanted to relocate, and essentially it was a wine store, and wanted to move in, and the tenant that was there, the landlord wasn't happy with him, and essentially, there's an opportunity there to move his practice to a bigger space, build it out, and essentially, the landlord produced a document and said, you can take over the lease. And normally you think, okay, that's just fine. I'll take over the lease and I'll take it over because the location was good. But that is your opportunity, right? The landlord at this point has something that they need. They need that space filled. The client that was there couldn't pay rent, or was, defaulting left and right. And a dentist is one of the top types of tenants that landlords look for, right? Hardly ever miss your rent, right? Hardly ever default. Bring no problems to the property. Low maintenance, low concerns, low interactions with the landlord, and drive other businesses in the area, right? You are probably the most prized tenant for a landlord, and what they do, they end up doing, they end up charging you the most rent, right? Recently, I negotiated a deal where our client actually was trying to purchase the property, so they did a due diligence on the property, and the due diligence report produced a rent roll, which showed our tenant's rent, but also everybody else's rent, right? So for the same building, same area, retail setting, they were being charged around $30 a square foot. Everybody else was being charged $20 a square foot. Right? It's not fair, right? And the benefit of having someone like Cirrus on board is that we have access to our propriety information, which is leases that we've done in the area, right? So, for example, all the wins that we got for Dr. Alavian, all this information, all information about the landlord, how many interactions we had, what we went in with starting rent, what the landlord came back with, the back and forths until we reached the rent that we achieved, and not just for Dr. Alavian, right? All our clients we store, so we know what everybody's paying in the area. So if the landlord comes and says, "Well, I want $40 square foot," I'd be like, just down the street, we did a deal at $30 a square foot, so it's not happening. Secondly, we use CoStar, which is a licensed software which has information on every single leasable space in North America, and not just rental information, demographics, traffic counts, when the buildings were built, financing on the building. We know the landlord's financial position, how bad they need the tenancy, how long the space has been on the market. This is all used as leverage during the negotiation. And this drives the financial wins, right? So we were able to move Dr. Alavian without any practice downtime. We got him 2 months of free rent for his fixturing, 2 options to renew, a 10-year term, so 20 years of runway. So let's say he's going to retire in 10 years, which I don't think he is. He's doing very well. But let's say he was going to retire in 10 years. Now he has something to sell. Without that term, without the runway, you have nothing to sell, right? If you go to expiry, we have clients that come to us that are month to month and just want to sell their practice. Well, the incoming buyer, you got to think about the incoming buyer. The incoming buyer has nothing ahead of him, right? You want that runway to be as much as possible, and that increases the value of your practice. Sure, you could still sell your practice, but what are you going to get for it? And you always want to maximize your returns. And then the lease wins, right? So it's not just about the financial, removing the relocation clause or reducing it, limiting the personal liability, right? So if a landlord insists on a personal guarantee because they've never dealt with you before, not to have it indefinite, right? Work it out where maybe it's for the first 2 years of the lease, 3 years of the lease, whatever it is. Putting in that death and disability clause, you are the star of the show. If you go down, your practice is likely going to go down, and you don't want your family, your heirs, to be stuck with that responsibility. You want the ability to terminate if you are able to do that. Right? Demolition clause, blacked it out. So maybe the landlord says, well, this is standard in our lease. We have to have a demolition clause. And in Toronto, you're going to have a demolition clause in every lease that's presented to you. But that doesn't mean that it has to be there for the indefinite time of the lease. You can black out a period. Let's just say you're signing a 10-year lease. The bank needs that time to make their money back, right? You can't have a demo clause that can be exercisable in year 3. The bank's going to go, no way, I'm not lending you the money if I'm not going to make back the return, right? So we use that as leverage, right? To say, well, okay, maybe you can have a demo clause, but not during this period. Not during the first 10 years, not during the first 15 years, right?
So, again, just a great sort of situation case study here. One of the best things we can share is this was a perfect situation where the doctor was busy being a doctor and needed some help and advice, and was in a space where in West Van, and he knew he was going to be up for a relocation at some point and or demolition. So proactively, he was looking. Worked with his worked was with his commercial real estate attorney and whatnot, purchased a business. So again, purchased a wine store just because he wanted that space. He didn't want the wine store, he wanted the space. Then obviously having to deal with the lease and lease assignment from wine store to dental lease, relocation, who's moving in after him, what's the plan with the new one, and giving as much runway, and built it a beautiful five operatory clinic. So again, we share this not to be alarmist or otherwise, but again, really being aware that if there is any risk of a potential relocation, the earlier the better in terms of leverage, coming forth with a plan. And if there is going to be a forced relocation, it can easily be 18 or 24 months to pick up and relocate. Excellent job there, Tal. Lots of different stuff that landlords will add in. Again, there's just so much stuff that if you haven't read through your lease lately, worthwhile dusting it off, because landlords will certainly add lots of specific language to those benefits. And lots of key pieces that if you read through, you said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's there," right? I mean, language here, landlord at the bottom, for example, is if the tenant objects to the relocation or location of the new premises, the landlord has the right to terminate the lease on 30 days written notice. So let's say they do ask you to relocate and you say no, right? Okay, great, right? You're out in 30 days. So, again, the questions are, we do see a lot of examples, and having talked to over 20,000 different doctors and lease type situations over Cirrus's history, I would dare to say there's a situation we haven't seen before. Bottom line is, be cautious, understand what's in the lease, and have that lease professionally reviewed to at least find out what the risks are, and then more importantly, what's a reasonable output from the next renewal or expansion or second location, etc. Bottom line, it doesn't take much to calculate that a relocation or otherwise could easily be a huge hit to the saleability and or EBITDA of the clinic. So, as we wrap and go to some Q&A, some key questions here are, again, how? What's the solution, right? And bottom line is, here's what they teach the landlords. And trust me, they do courses just like this. So one of the key things to be aware of is think of your leverage as, right, your watch on your wrist. Think of this circle as hands on the clock. Landlords are taught that they can increase their profit without a penny of additional expense by doing nothing more than running out the clock. So, term, 32 years in business, we know that term is equal to leverage. Therefore, by starting as early as possible, 24 months in advance is typically our typical guidance for an average renewal negotiations. When do most doctors end up doing it? 3 months, maybe 6 months. But landlords are taught, hey, if they can stall, delay, I'm golfing, I'm traveling, it's vacation, it's too soon, the market, I don't know, right? Any day that passes decreases your leverage and increases the likelihood that the landlord can put whatever new standard form lease in front of you or whatever new rental rate, and knowing full well across the country it's at least 18 to 24 months to pick up and relocate. So the more time, the more leverage to maximize that negotiation perspective.
Yeah, and it's something you just don't want to sleep on, right? It's not something that, oh well, it's probably going to expire in a couple of years, and I just want to, I'll wait and see, and then when I'll think about it, and maybe I'll start it earlier than the expiry date, but you really want to pay attention to this. Like for example, I have a project in my house which is just replacing a stopper in my sink, and I paid $20 for that stopper, and it was 2 months ago. My loss there, if it never happens, which I'm sure it will happen because everybody's complaining about it, is $20, right? We're talking about a $1 million contract here that we're saying, oh, I'll deal with it later. You have to be ahead of the curve. You have to know what you're dealing with. Just minimally understand what you've signed on for already.
Bang on. So again, some key knowledge pearls we always get asked on. So have a process. So here's a little bit of the secret sauce we do in the background. So what we figured out over the years is number one is um, get all the information. The amount of doctors that we talk to that don't have an original copy of the lease back to 1986 or the amendments, renewals, exhibits, riders, you name it. You want to have a complete digital story. And if you look at your most recent lease at the very top, it'll typically break down all the other, paperwork in that chronological history. So number one, get that digital information. If you don't have a copy, that's okay. You can typically email your landlord and they'll send you back a digital copy because I'm sure they've got it on file. The second piece is, do you have a copy of the lease that has been signed by both you and the landlord? So many doctors sign it, send it in, don't get anything back in return, and suddenly think, oh, shoot, right? In many cases, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So you always want to make sure that you get a copy and countersigned copy by the landlord. Number two, And this is really important is in a lot of our calls and lease reviews and consultations, part of it is understanding the past, right? The how it went with the landlord in the past. Have they had any help with the negotiation or renegotiation of the past? So what happened in the past? Where are we at now? And then more importantly, what are the goals? What sort of procedures do you want to do? Are we wanting to do Botox? Or we want to expand into the adjacent suite? Are we thinking on bringing on an associate? Do we want to add an extra chair to do more hygiene? Staffing, staffing, staffing. When do we want to transition? Right? Depending on your goals, depending on production, depending on the saleability of your clinic, are you just going to sell the charts? Right? Or are you going to sell the clinic as is? Right? Which is typically worth more than the sum of its parts. But having those practice goals and objectives before we pick up the phone is key. Number three is stressed, right? Have that lease review. Talib or anyone on our team can help to go through line by line and look through, not everything, but certainly highlight a lot of the red flags that you may not be aware of and the impact to you and or the saleability of the clinic. Number four is, and this all also gets sort of passed aside, is the market data, right? Have you retained anyone or have you compared your rent to market price? And as Taleb mentioned, the software is pretty remarkable that we utilize the rental rates, the vacancies, the comp reports, and of course our proprietary data that looks at all the other deals close by. Before, what have we not done at this point? Right? We've also thought of that carefully choreographed game of chess of the first ask and then the counter and the back and forth. But of course, we have not picked up the phone and called the landlord. So, one of the best pieces we can suggest is long before, but the last thing we want to do is say, hey, I had a great, webinar with Talib last night, and Mr. Landlord, hey, I know my lease is coming up soon. How much are you going to charge me? And skip steps 1 through 5. Then negotiate the financial clauses, then negotiate the business clauses, right? But basically, don't stop until you get to that final form lease that you're satisfied with, right? To make sure that rent is aligned with market price. And typically, on average, we're seeing that per dollar of incoming production, usually about 8.32% goes towards the landlord in terms of tenancy expense. In other words, right, as you quickly do the math, if you're higher, then obviously there's a rent or a production problem. If you're lower, right, then technically, hey, maybe it is time to potentially expand. If you look at your production per chair right now, and you're at roughly $250 per square or per chair in terms of production, 250,000, right? Then usually that's just one of the key performance indicators as we help to advise our clients that it maybe is worthwhile to ask the landlord, can we move into that adjacent space? Or hey, that accounting office has been pretty empty. I wonder if they'd give up half of the space that we could add another 2 or 3 operatories. That could be a remarkable improvement. And more importantly, if you are thinking of selling to a corporate buyer or otherwise, so important that they have room to grow and obviously being able to add associates and ramp up production after your sale. So to summarize, right, really make sure you're going in with a key plan. Think of all the key steps long in advance before the first call, right? And if you feel like, hey, this is way more than I can facilitate, or I just don't have the time to do it, right? There are great resources such as Cirrus to be able to help take a lot of the stress off your shoulders. So, in terms of a lease review, right, which again is important to understand what is within the lease. Talib, maybe give us a little background of how you review the lease, what's involved with the process, right, and what the client gets from that hour-long call.
Yeah, so I will personally go through the entire lease, pull out all the red flags that I find, and then we are going to also pull up the market data, right? So we're going to pull up some preliminary reports in regards to, rents in the area, what you should be paying, do an analysis of what you have been paying, and then go into other information as well, right? It's not just about the lease and the market, your plans for the future, how long you want to be in the space, how you want to exit. Maybe you have a buyer, maybe you own the space. whatever the scenario is, we go through that scenario, right? If you own, what rent should you be charging? How do you protect yourself as a landlord? Every aspect of real estate tenancy, whether you're on the landlord side or you're leasing or you're looking to open your first practice or you're looking to purchase a practice, there is going to be a lease or a document involved in regards to the real estate. And that's what we analyze, and that's what we provide you guidance on. And obviously, it's complimentary as being part of our webinar tonight. And happy to schedule that in. And I know you can only hear us from this webinar, but would love to hear your voices and how you've been running your business, and any way that we can assist in making that business better for you.
Perfect. So a little exit poll, making it easy across the board. Again, we appreciate certainly Sinclair for helping to sponsor and gain some awareness. We are part of, and as a contract partner for Sinclair, we're here to help ensure that we can connect you with your local representative as need be. So there's a quick section there towards the end. We're very happy to be a part of the practice services and to help make sure that we keep as much money into your pockets as possible. So we certainly appreciate everyone's time and extended time this evening. Ultimately, just remember you're not alone in all of this. It is no shortage of challenges, objectives, and otherwise. But you are an incredible tenant, right? You would love to have you as a tenant. For those of you that own, right, you really want to be contemplating whom your future buyer will be and if you want to keep that real estate as a passive form of income. So ultimately, one of the core pieces as we really look through all the components of this evening, here's our contact details. Info at SiriusConsultingGroup.com. This is Talib's direct phone number. But ultimately, I think the takeaways from this evening are uh, ultimately starting early. More time is equal to leverage. Number two is there are so many different, both financial and business clauses within the lease that can have a material impact to the saleability. Number three is you've got a lot more leverage than you think. And in terms of the structuring of the negotiation and when and how to reach out to the landlord and what to offer and what financial components are involved, these are key pieces that you've probably done yourself many times before. But this time, help to understand where the red flags are, what are your top priorities, when are you thinking of transitioning, and then most importantly, coming up with that plan, coming up with that long-term plan to make sure that the banks and the practice brokers are all aligned to help make sure that it's not a significant issue to the eventual saleability. A few components here specifically, again, looking through, again, so for those 86% here with the leases. So for those of you that don't have a lease or may not have signed the lease or in the process of signing, would definitely suggest that it's worthwhile specifically understanding what is in that letter of intent. Is it binding? Is it non-binding, right? Did the real estate broker do it? Did the landlord prepare it? Those sorts of things. All too often, doctors drive around their local strip malls. They see the number on the sign, they call it. Before they know it, they're signing a binding letter of intent on the trunk of a broker's car without truly understanding that in the landlord's eyes, hey, it's done. They've agreed to term, they've agreed to rents, it's locked in, right? That can dramatically decrease your leverage as it pertains to the negotiation. For those of you that have leases that are expiring 43% within 2 to 5 years, great. Right. Thinking of, am I planning to make any renovations to the space? Am I bringing in a contractor? Am I going to make any specific investments? If you are, or adding an operatory or otherwise, these are some of the key components that we want to help protect. And if you are, suspend $300,000 and add a couple of operatories and buy some equipment, and then renew the lease in 2 or 3 years, the landlord's high likelihood they're going to increase rent, right? Again, for those of you that have leases that are expiring within the next 5 to 10 years, there might not be a lot that can be done, and the landlord's not going to reopen the lease 1 year into a 10-year term unless there's something in it for them. But we're still happy to review it for you so you know where some of those specific clauses and red flags are as we go through. For those of you that are requested to be connected with one of your local Sinclair representatives, no problems at all. And yeah, we appreciate the ongoing support for those of you that have joined us on the CE. Hopefully, this provided some great knowledge pearls this evening. Lots of data, lots of experience to go through, and just remember that you have more leverage than you know. And we're certainly wishing you a very successful and profitable next lease renewal negotiation. Perfect. Appreciate your time. Any other additional questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Perfect. Excellent. Any other frequently asked questions you get, Talib?
Frequently asked questions. Are the Jays going to take it this year?
Excellent. Yeah, that's a key component for sure. Uh, Excellent. Well, appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic evening, everybody. Thank you very much.